humans tend to mimic each other to gain like leverage or like a clear advantage.
Should we talk about what we think is the biggest trend of
Yeah.
2023? Dun, dun,
I'm
dun.
super excited. The supermarket is going back to opening in-person checkout counters.
Welcome to Often Unexpectedly, a podcast where we discuss design and things we stumble upon often unexpectedly. I am Sushant, an industrial designer based in Seattle.
I'm Gokul, an industrial and interaction designer based in the Bay Area.
And today we're going to talk about trends, everything about recessions, layoffs, and the uncertainty all around. And also just the global trends, what we left behind, and what we're going to get into over the next few years. We're going to break down all these shifts that are happening with a look towards the future. I want to begin by sort of looking into what trends are. Yesterday, Gokul, you mentioned something really interesting as to why trends happen.
Yeah, so this is something I came across during my research class when we were trying to do research for a specific project. We were looking at trends, like the topic of the podcast, and I started to question like why do trends happen and where do these trends emerge from? Like why do they even come up in our society? And say usually behind a trend there's a behavioral change, and when you try to relate that behavioral change to why it happened, so like if you go back another why, it's usually like it's something to do with pain. So like once you have like when people feel pain or discomfort, they try to change things, and that's how trends come. Few of them like gain traction and like go on to impact multiple domains. But it almost made me think that go ahead.
Are we talking emotional pain?
Yeah, I think it's emotional and physical, like based, but it just comes from a cause of discomfort. I don't, for example, I would say the 2008 recession was a mix of both, but mainly like a mental toll on millennials. And that discomfort, like until then, maximalism was like ruling Britney Spears and all the kind of fashion and everything they were wearing. But after that, the rise of minimalism and less materialistic and experiences over objects was a thing, and that came from the discomfort of the 2008 recession.
And do you think there's societal need for expression as well, which sort of gets clubbed into this whole idea of trend building? When you wanna express to the world and you don't have, let's say, everyone else doing the same thing, do you feel like there's a need to stand out, or do you think there's a need to blend in? Basically, what I'm trying to say is like when we talk about acting on that pain, do people try to rebel against it, or do people try to find their own community or their own tribe?
Yeah, I think it's usually a mix of two things. I was reading the book on like how to forecast trends, and there they mentioned people who are making the trends are not even aware that they're making a trend. But like how you said, they are trying to validate that pain through like expression. Like they had a discomfort, whether and it's how like retail is happening, or like how certain product is being sold, or just how wellness is being sold to you. It could be different things, and then they start something new just because it's like a reactory measure to what the pain they're feeling. um and it's usually these early adopters that sort of make it a trend or a fad. So like until and unless the early adopter comes in, it can't really become a trend. So usually the early adopters are people like who'll sort of like validate that if that's like a pain being felt by a lot of people, or if it's like a very niche. So based on that, if it's felt by community at large, then they go on to become like game changing trends. But if it's something like a niche community is having, probably again it's you won't know until you go deep down Reddit that there's a niche community that people have built around that pain.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Like even today's example of what pain is, we have to talk about layoffs. So many people being laid off from the tech world. close to, I think it's above 100,000 people now in the last year itself, from companies like Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and whatnot. um I think, like, just going back a decade or a decade or 2 decades ago, the the openness in talking about layoffs just wasn't there. A lot of people would feel embarrassed that they were laid off. I think when the recession happened, then of course everybody kind of knew that this is the reality.
Mm-hmm,
I
mm-hmm.
mean, half the world was, or let's say half the America was laid off, or they found themselves in a position where they just didn't have a job or companies to really go back to. And I think over the last decade, it has taught people that talking about the real hard things is important. And I feel over the last decade, the trend of talking more about work, talking more about the hard failures has become almost a very acceptable sort of thing, right? I kind of want to go back to India as well, a culture where profession and career is sort of at the peak of any family's goal for their kid, right? And even
Mm-hmm.
for the kids, like they're through their education, they're brought up in the mindset that they have to work and they have to do something. Um, and that's where, if you talk about failure, if you talk about being laid off from work, it's looked down upon. It's actually embarrassing that somebody got laid off from work. But over the last decade, it feels like, yeah, it feels like everybody is open to talk about work. What I don't like about this is how people talk about it on LinkedIn. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think um what you said before kind of builds up to what you're feeling right now. Like, let's take a step back and look at this way. But what you were previously citing is, from the past few years, this is actually, like, since before COVID, being more informal and candid has been, like, building up, whether it's in a formal setting like through emails or LinkedIn, or even on, like, Instagram, with small tiny trends like photo dump and things like that, like less curation, being more informal, being more candid. I'd say, like, authentic was probably the appropriate word for all of it. So that is kind of gaining traction in all aspects of life. And when it comes to LinkedIn, I'm sure, like, it's a much more nuanced discussion of, like, why few companies are laying off, why few are not, but we don't want to get in. But what we are looking at is few people kind of reacting to the layoffs in a very in a very, like, not I don't want to say non-bothered, but, like, in a very gracious way. So, like, more power to them. But there are still few people who are feeling that's sort of, like, unfiltered. Of course, if you have stayed 16 years in a big tech company and your stocks have vested, that's a different story. You're probably more comfortable and more grateful for the opportunity the company has given. But if you're someone who was just recently hired, and especially an immigrant on H1B, worst case you're on OPT,
Yeah.
it's a different story, right? And someone kind of being very gracious, I'm sure there are exceptions, but there is a certain number that goes beyond it. And that's what I feel few people are not ready to I wouldn't say accept, but, like, they're not comfortable with, like, hey, like, if some company is laying you off, be truthful, be honest, like, put your feelings out there, and, like,
Yeah.
go ask for that next job. Like, don't try to be so forgiving and gracious to a company which, for them, you were just a number, or, like, bottom line. So
Yeah, I'd agree with that 100%. And in fact, when you actually have conversations with these people, they'll be a lot more honest and talk about how disrespected it feels to be let go when a cut like this happens, and how scary it is actually to now figure out a job in the next two months, if you're on an H1B visa or whatever visa. Um, I want to say that this is almost like two things clashing. One is the expected behavior on LinkedIn, which is to be nice and cushy and very friendly and very sort of like rounded out version of you. There's
of
no,
course.
you have to filter out and edit a lot of things. It's the edited version.
Hmm.
But the actual feeling of being let go is really hard. I cannot even imagine what it feels like. I'm sure if it happened to me, I'd be furious, and I'm sure these guys are furious as well. But that anger and the post itself, or like how it reflect, or what they do after that, just doesn't I don't know. It feels like a
Yeah.
mismatch. It feels so odd to see someone just, laid off after 6 months and still like thanking people for the time and the opportunity. Yes, I know you're like grateful about the opportunity, but man, this sucks, right?
Yeah, I agree with the contradiction. It almost makes me think, like taking a step back, asking like, why are people wanting you to be authentic? Like, why are people almost sort of like asking you to like follow this trend of being authentic? Do you have any comments on it?
It just feels like LinkedIn has this unsaid way of writing, sort of like how Reddit has this, this contract that you sign, that
Social
you have
contract.
to yeah, it's sort of like a social contract that everybody behaves this way, so you have to behave that way. I think LinkedIn is kind of like that, like, and that's also a big reason that a lot of people are repulsed by it, especially younger professionals who just be like, why is everybody so boring on LinkedIn? So I think it's it's one part is that like there is a format to LinkedIn that everybody is feeding into. It's almost like a trend that people are following because
Yeah.
have been nice about layoffs, and now you don't want to be the one that goes and says, this company is crap. I did not expect this. I don't know what to do with my life. That
Yeah.
that's the A is that, and B, I think it's they don't want themselves to the firstly it's already vulnerable enough, or the fact that they're putting out such a big piece of their information, which wasn't the norm, like I discussed, like 20 years ago.
Hmm.
And second, like they feel that people are gonna uh, ask questions about their own gratefulness or their own I guess motivations to do a job. Like if somebody comes off as very ungrateful and angry, and which honestly should be the case, but if they come off like that, there's going to be a repercussion. People will see them a different way, so there is this
Yeah.
need to follow a trend or sort of like edit
Yeah.
it for the most part.
Yeah, that reminds me of something, like asking the question, why do you need to follow a trend? Whether it's being authentic, non-authentic. Like being non-authentic is still kind of trend, but it could be a trend fading away, but it's still a trend. But when we ask ourselves the question of like, why does someone need to follow something? I came across this really interesting thing from like Charles Darwin's work. It's called like meme gene.
The meme gene.
Yeah. It's it I think the bottom line, it goes something like humans tend to mimic each other to gain like leverage or like a clear advantage. So it almost makes me question, like, is that why you would follow a trend? Like, say, again, going back to that Instagram photo dump, right? I don't even know when it started, but it was the it thing, and then it just like picked on.
So yeah, like
And
when people say photo dump from last week and they put like random pictures for
yeah, yeah,
on one post
yeah.
as
And
a
then like
glimpse, it's sort of like a window vignette to their lives, right? Like an unedited, unfiltered, just here's what
mhm.
happened.
Yeah. And I started doing that because, again, like to gain a clear advantage, to tell again like, hey, I'm hip, or to to sort of increase my social capital, or whatever the benefits that comes with following a trend. And again, probably there's a trend on each platform. Like LinkedIn might have its own, which kind of goes back to the social contract we were talking about. Reddit might, like, Reddit is like giving the most authentic and helpful reply as a comment, so you get upvoted and the comment is there, so you sort of become this like trusted entity, or OP, is that what? I don't want to sound like an old man. Yeah, that's like really interesting, is questioning ourselves, like, why do humans even follow trends? But what do you think? What is your view on like, why do people follow trends?
To fit in and to not be weird, I think one of the big things, I think we were talking about this yesterday, the idea of being weird is weird, and whatever is normal, or the idea of normal, like if multiple people are doing it, that makes it normal. People want to do that, right? So, and like you said, there's the first movers don't even know when they're starting something, which might be out of rebellion, might be out of pain, or might be out of just expression, need for expression. um, there's they're starting something new, and then as the group goes bigger and bigger, that becomes a trend only because it feels like a normal thing to do. And normal is also in the eyes of the beholder, right? No, not everybody will agree and say that this is normal,
Yeah.
like, you know.
Yeah, I think like when we say a trend, it's nice to set context. Is a trend doesn't have to be like a movement accepted by 7 billion people in the world. It could be as niche as 90 million people or 10 million people or even one.
Here's the things that I don't like about trends that go too big, right? One, everyone picks up that trend, everyone starts doing it, and then we reach a state of saturation, right? Forget about aligning with the trend or not. It's more like everybody's doing it, and it just feels um, so overpowering to my brain. Like every piece of content is that, every piece of information is that, wherever you go, it's that same style of things. And there's a few things, like even the lingo, for example, when a lingo picks up, like
Mm-hmm.
currently, like when you look at the 2000s kids, the lingo those guys are using, uh whether I'm aligned with it or not is not the question, but the fact that it's really out there in everything. Brands are trying to do that, celebrities are trying to say those things, songs have that just like leads to oversaturation.
Yeah, I think this just made me go back to the framework you people usually have. It's called the innovation adoption curve or something. It's like, again, like we discussed, early adopters, early majority, and late majority. You can say the same for trend as well. There are a bunch of early adopters, and then the whole market like swoops in, and then there's like a late majority. It So when we take a step back from even like early adopters and go back to the inventors, right? There's someone who start the trend with a particular meaning, and a trend has this powerful message. A good assumption to make is probably as it goes along the adaptation curve, like the message kind of gets diluted. By the time it reaches the late majority, uh, it
Yeah.
like, yeah, sort of has become boring, if that makes sense.
Would you say, do you remember the was it the ice bucket challenge?
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Do you think it would work if we started it right now?
Yeah, for like, if you do an ice bucket challenge for climate change, maybe yes, because that's in trend. I mean, I support a lot of these things. The question is not whether I'm aligned with these or not, but the fact that it's become it's come on everybody's radar, right? So climate change, for example, the fact that it's a word that everybody wants to use. There's brands and companies trying to use that to their advantage, right? That's what we
Yeah.
began with. Like everybody's trying to jump onto this for their advantage.
Yeah.
Um,
That's almost interesting because I read on this frog report that how like a climate activist is now a climate routinist, you know. They're more active in it's that like eco warrior to casual climate routinist. That means it's part of your daily life.
yeah.
So like eco warrior were probably the early adopters, and now I think climate has come to its peak stage where it's like a given. Like we were working on a project, and like when we were talking about sustainability with the clients, we were kind of suggesting that like don't address climate change as your advantage of being sustainable, because that's a given. That's like the
Yeah.
new norm.
That's the baseline.
Yeah. So I think probably like couple of years down the line, you'd probably need to be like a more nuanced climate routinist, like probably live up to your word. And when you're not, I think that's when you start like hating the trend. Like right now we do greenwashing, right? I think
Yeah.
that's the trend we hate, that has come from like the sustainability trend. So I
Yeah,
think the message gets diluted and you start to hate the trend.
100%. I also want to say that nobody wants to be like left out, or nobody wants to be looked at as weird, and that's the same with companies and brands. If everybody around you is talking about climate change, brands don't want to be the weird ones to not do it, right? But they don't know how to do it, like, but they don't know how to actually help and support these ventures and these missions. So what they do is, like you mentioned, greenwashing. They'll use the word, or they'll uh, put it half baked into their copywriting, into their packaging, but the actual meat of the problem is still there. But this
Hmm.
saves them from being weird, because yes, they're saying the right things.
Yeah,
You know?
but I think the problem also lies in how you interpret a trend. Like, for example, sustainability for a travel company might mean something way different what sustainability means for a cosmetic company. And like when you try to literally interpret or just do what other people are doing, obviously you're going to
Yeah.
greenwash, or you're going to be like, hey, like we have new eco packaging, but like our bottles are still like plastic and things like that.
Yeah.
So if there is a trend, ask yourself what the human behavior is, which is people are just not comfortable with the fact that consumers are the reasons that plastic
Yeah.
like exist, or we are supporting that behavior. Okay, like consumers have accepted that, though it's not true.
Yeah.
um and now you can't make them feel like even more uncomfortable and like cheated. uh the real way to it is like the real way to look at it is, if that customer is part of your customer base, like what is the most meaningful, impactful thing you can do in terms of sustainability. Not like what Uber does is like, if you take some I'm not, I could be wrong, it's like if you take the Uber option, like
The
eco Uber
green the
option,
green the
yeah,
green
like
car. Yeah,
it'll
the one
plant
with
a
the
tree or
leaf.
something.
What
Yeah,
it does?
yeah, I saw an advert near like a AMC here, but it had something to do with like carbon offsetting when you choose that option, and I'm
Is that
like,
theoretically or like literally plant a tree?
I'm not sure, because again, that's like a whole another thing where like companies just like buy
Mm,
forests and like
yeah,
write it
yeah,
off as carbon. Like, don't want to get into that. But coming back to the topic, like know how to interpret it. Like probably if you're an ID brand, maybe it could be changing your CMF, but probably it's not. But maybe it could be in terms of repairability. Again, you get to make that choice. What is most meaningful for your consumer? Probably if you're a speaker brand, repairability will be on the forefront, but if it's like a use and throw brand, like compostable plastic, things like that will be on the. So you see how like nuanced sustainability is.
yeah,
um
yeah. Kind of want to bring this back to the topic of trends, right? And we talked about a look towards the future. Um, should we talk about what we think is the biggest trend of
yeah,
2023? Dun, dun,
I'm super
dun.
excited. This is the most, I personally feel the most important thing that people are not paying attention to. Maybe they have experienced it in one form or the other in their life, but people are not really understanding the impact of it. What I Let me ask you, what is the new trend?
Okay, the biggest trend starting now over the next couple of years to the next 5 years is almost an anti-trend,
That's true.
right?
That's
Did I
right.
say that right?
That's right. It is almost like there are multiple names to it. Frog called it post aspirational. Some in fashion, BOF called it anti curational. Some people called it authentic. But it's looking past that aspirational, like everything is perfect standard. Kind of going back to
Hmm.
all our LinkedIn conversations.
Hmm.
I was just waiting to like kind of say this, like even then. But it's sort of like stop being that aspirational person, be more candid, be, and this is manifesting in many ways.
Hmm.
Like for example, like videos. Do you know that Mr. Beast actually has like one of the best probably video producers, but he intentionally keeps his videos like curates them to be more authentic and less edited and not a
Yeah.
Netflix show.
There's a sense of home video quality when you watch Mr. Beast, even though like he has all the money in the world to make like a, yeah, like you said, like a Netflix film.
Yeah, and it also kind of goes back even in like college. I think again these are not something that happened like yesterday or in 2022
Let's
December,
let's
like they've.
actually let's actually give some examples. So when we talk about anti-trend, I want to start with also TikTok, right?
Mm,
Um, people, the amount of videos of just people picking up the camera, just straight out of bed, talking about their morning routine, unfiltered, unedited, just dropping that up, and that blows up. brands who have tried to craft their videos with the right transitions, the right color grading, the right mics and whatnot, those ads are not converting, as opposed to the ones that look like user generated content, that look like just somebody's just got up and recorded a video, just a raw,
Yeah.
unfiltered, no color grading.
To exactly to what you're saying, I found this like really interesting talk where they discuss that all the millennials or Gen X were all byproducts of like what was aspirational to them, or like what was trendy for them, like big blockbusters and in terms of video, right?
Yeah,
Movie productions like Avatar, like VFX was up and coming, big budget movies, massive action.
yeah,
So that was kind of aspirational for them. So like even if you go back couple of years ago, like 2016, 2017, even music videos were high production.
yeah,
So things like, but now they're becoming more candid. They're becoming like tight knit. It's probably happening in one room.
yeah.
Um,
Shot on
I
iPhone,
almost
bro.
yeah, I almost want to say Beyonce's 7-Eleven like music video started this trend, but it could not be of like anti-curational
Hey, I
trend.
almost want to say like indie bands became too big, and when people look into indie bands, their initial videos were all just garage videos.
Anti-cur, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and
and
that's the whole idea of like indie becoming so big as well now. Like things like shoegaze and like other alternative pop songs. These are very smaller scale genres
yeah.
that didn't have the prime time appeal.
But what has happened now is that was happening in a generation where movie editing was aspirational, right? Like big movies were aspirational in terms of video content. But our generation, like Gen Z especially, have grown up in the age of YouTube. I'd say to an extent, like Vines, or like more informal videos where people were making like quick memes and things like that. All the content they were interacting from the get go were a bit unedited, very homely, and there was
Mm.
not that much like finesse to the video editing. So like now they're sort of coming in the couple of years, and half of Gen Z is already into their prime spending years, and they're trying to find and look for brands that kind of fill that like match that voice of post aspirational, like anti curational content. And I think like on video, like people like Mr. Beast and like all the content creators on TikTok and Reels are killing it because they're just being authentic. They're not like putting way too much effort into it,
Yeah, it's
and they're
it's
just being real.
relatable. It's relatable, right? When you see that, hey, I could also do this. It's a fact that the most watched videos on YouTube are reaction videos. For some reason, like people want authentic reactions and they
Dude,
like
i
watching
i
people.
always stop at a reaction video. I know that person's gonna give like the most like stock expression reaction, but something just makes me want to be like, okay, like what is he gonna react like?
Yeah, yeah. And there's
Yeah,
so much discovery happening because of that as well, right? Like it's reaction videos is PR, and it is an actual strategy. Like you can submit your videos to these guys and like songs and music and what. I've done that for my band, just like found people who would react to it. And it's so weird because there's an expected behavior, but you still want to know what he has to say. Like you said,
yeah.
there's still a stock version of like, yes, he's gonna stop at this part. Yes, he's gonna say something, fun. So I have to see it. But you know what the content is. Like you could. Here, the
Yeah.
funny thing is, you could consume the content, but again, the stats show that the most watched content is actually somebody else watching the content.
That's why Mr. Beast has a whole reaction channel to his thing.
Which is
So that's
insane.
like really interesting. But that is in terms of like video, right? But in terms of say like branding or something like that,
Mm.
or in terms of copywriting or marketing, like what are you noticing? What are signals you're
I'm
picking up that are forming this trend?
definitely seeing brands become a lot more human. Even like the big brands like Comcast and um what's the Verizon and whatnot. Like these guys are trying to make more relatable, fun content as opposed to big, flashy advertisements that really talk about their product. If you actually go on Reels and TikTok, you'll stumble across a lot of bigger brands trying to mimic this new trend of anti-curation, trying to
Mm-hmm.
actually put effort into looking like they didn't put in effort. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
you'll also notice, like, so this actually started on Twitter as well, where I wanna say it was I don't know if it was Burger King, McDonald's, or Wendy's. One of these, or like actually all of these, had this whole beef around each other because their
Yeah.
marketing guys were very authentic and very prompt in replying to people's comments and like each other
Yeah.
and like pulling each other's leg. And that we have never seen that before, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Brands were very uptight with what their messaging is. They always wanted it to be one way interaction, which is we'll show you an ad or we'll show you a banner, you're going to take in the information and then you come to us. But now, because you can comment on things, you can react to things, you can like things, brands are trying to make their outreach as an interactive sort of play. So the play here is like, I want to be relatable, I want to be conversational, rather than here's a banner, just one way information, you react to it, you do whatever with it, what do you want, or like you take that information and that's it.
Let's look at some example brands that are doing it well in terms of this speak of marketing, right? I think our place, the internet's most favorite fan, they're like but I think they have a really, or even especially
So
a lot
should
in
we should we
skincare
get
brands.
a should we give a bit of context? Our place is pots and pans brand, and they're expanding into kitchenware altogether, cookware altogether, actually.
Hmm.
And it's started by a Pakistani origin lady who's now built up a business solely during the COVID time, and it's doing a multi-million in revenue. And the whole the pots and pans are, they look nice, but what were you saying? So you wanted to get into their messaging, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You kind of pointed it out to me where you said we were kind of scrolling through the website, and you're like, dude, the marketing is like so upfront and like so. I don't want to say dumbed down because it's really well done, but it's very authentic. I would say the way they're messaging. Like, I think the opening line is "Welcome to our place" or something like that on the packaging and on their website. That is, it's got a different ring to it and vibe to it versus say you open a Cuisine Arts 32 pack. So, and it,
64 pack dinner set,
yeah,
25% off.
so you see those two brands, and you also look at the person around this brand. It's sort of like this like immigrant person who has come into her prime spending years and was not, and a lot of these business people who are building these brands are like, hey, we are like in a prime spending years and we are not finding brands that fit our voice, so I'm going to go ahead
Hmm.
and make that one. And that resulted in that authentic messaging, and also sort of informed the way they curate their like pictures, or how everything about it is very like that anti-curational trend, where it's not like a catalog photo where it's like high budget pristine kitchens. It's sort of like that informal affordable economical kitchen, and the pans just
Hmm.
sitting nicely in it.
Going from physical products to actual apps and stuff, I've seen like interfaces, UIs, people trying to break away from your standard, like those boxed in layout. There, in fact, when you see a lot of like creative studio websites, um, they are sort of letting go of the grid and really experimenting with sometimes 3D space, like what if the images are floating, or sometimes typography,
Yeah,
how it changes. They're almost like giving you the option to like, you want light mode or dark mode. Like that's a common theme that I've seen, like where people are like, yo, we don't want to give you the most bland experience, let's spice it up. Let's, you click
yeah.
on it, the color changes of the website, like there's some
And
interaction feature.
I I think with just in general, like web being more powerful, where you can load your custom fonts and like different kind of interaction into websites now, that's really supporting in giving a voice. I wanted to give an example of a brand that's been making the rounds on like LinkedIn and awards is Moto, Motto. I hope I got that spelling
Is it
right.
is it motto, like just
Yeah,
like your
Motto.
manifesto? Yeah.
Oh, probably.
Hello Moto. We just made them
I,
Motorola.
I think they're a visual design consultancy. They're into branding, visual design marketing, and they have the exact same things. It's like breaking the grid, anti-symmetrical, floating images. Even the images are like anti-curational, and the message is like very upfront. It's not aspirational. It's not like, hey, let's build $1 billion brand together. It's more about people, like, hey, what can we do for the people who are buying into your brand? What can we do for you as people? Again, like, it's not
Mm.
client. It's like what
Their their website says ideas worth rallying around trademark.
see
That's the thing they've
see
trademarked.
like is that versus like if you pull up McKinsey is great. I have no hate against McKinsey. McKinsey, if you're hearing me, hire me. But I think whereas you go to a consultant, like the big consultancies, their messaging is more uptight, more formal as well. Uh, and
Wait, first I have to disable cookies on McKinsey's website so that they don't. Yeah, I think just like look of their website is also very to the grid, and it's literally a
yeah,
grid, their whole website.
yeah, and I'm sure like they have their own brand values and everything, and like a different clientele. But the we're here to talk about what's resonating with the audience of now, and to also kind of add more context to like who the audience are now, especially in US. I saw this Kroger ad, which aired this Christmas, but it was basically like a mixed race family kind of cooking together for Thanksgiving, actually, or Christmas. But it almost made me think a multi-generational shift. Like family dynamics are changing in the sense there's a second generation of like immigrant kids coming into their prime spending years, and what was aspirational before for their parents is probably what is not like probably what was aspirational before, like, you know uh, to be fair, like there was not that much inclusivity in terms of like ad branding, or like even in
Mm,
skincare. Like only now you're
yeah.
seeing skincare coming up for like brown skin, or especially people with like high pigmentation. So there's this change in that consumer happening there, like again, like multicultural. What is aspirational before is not aspirational for them, so they're still in that finding what is aspirational for them. And I think in that moment of finding what's aspirational for them, like they're rebelling. So that's where this anti-trend is thriving. So again, they are going to go find and build brands that are aspirational for them, and like they're like, like the next generation again will go on to like rebel against that. uh yeah,
And
I
do
just think that
you
kind of completes the circle of like the people are changing, they are not seeing voices, so they're rebelling, and brands are trying to cater to it, and they're figuring
mm,
out, hey, like, is this aspirational, is this not? But yeah.
I think a part of it also has to do with just younger entrepreneurs in general. I think wasn't there a stat that most people who left their jobs in 2021, they did so to start their own business. Actually, 30%, 37% of the workers who resigned in the first half of 2021 did so to launch their business. And the point I'm trying to make is because these folks are smaller businesses, they understand that setting up a business today means that they have to be authentic, they have to be on social media, they have to be transparent, they have to make a better business than the ones they were a part of, which
Yeah.
means everything from wellness to inclusivity to
Hmm.
cultural diversification, things like that. um, it feels like because people speak this language, they understand what they want to build, they'll go ahead and build it. And because more and more people are actually building it, that then results into the message spreading louder and clearer. Like I don't know if you've noticed this, but I feel over the last few years we have seen a lot more openness in how companies are built in
That's true.
general, right? Like
That's true.
everybody is giving you a behind the doors, behind the scenes view of what it takes to build a company, whether that's a one person company, 10%, or like a studio. Studios have opened their doors to like, hey, come look at us. Here's how we work.
It's
So,
almost this open iteration, and again, this was happening in a very niche, like I'm a Telugu speaking native, so like I follow a couple of content creators in like Andhra Pradesh, and he just likes to talk about movies. And he hosted this show where he basically asks his followers to send in movie scripts. And I think like he's vaguely connected to, like, he's not in the movie industries, but he has people like producers, line producers who work in the movie industry. And he'll get those guests to review the scripts, sort of
Mm.
helping his audience who are interested in film, like become filmmakers. And I've been following, I think this is like season 2. Like last time it just happened on a whim, like he decided to do it, and this time he wanted to make it like more formal. And I think the first episode kind of bombed.
Mm.
Like he planned it, he's
Hey,
like sent scripts.
that sounds a little close to home, buddy.
And it bombed in the sense like people were not prepared, like everyone coming on this thing were like, oh, I didn't know I was going to get selected, so I didn't. And people in the comment section were like, hey, episode was not good. And he was, and he made like not a filler episode, but a between the scenes sort of episodes, let's name it that, between the next episode and the previous episode, where he's like, hey guys, this is what my intention was, like you guys are not giving me like good scripts, like you guys are going to stand in front of. So it was very openly iterating. He was taking comments on like how to people were like commenting like, hey, like you could have like this sort of process where you reach out to them before, send Zoom links
Mm.
like this is what we follow in our company. And they're
Mm.
iterating it. And the second episode, it just happened this morning, and it had like great, like really high viewership. Like I think when I was there were almost like a peak of 3,000 people watching, and that's like a
Mm.
lot for
Live.
like a
Yeah.
YouTube live stream.
Yeah.
And
For the second
that,
episode, yeah.
yeah, and that is just really beautiful to see, where like going back to your example, that iteration happened live, taking feedback. It sort of reminds me this one thing I my professor told me in my retail class, that more than brands that do it, like that do their services really well, people are more loyal to brands that accept their mistake and correct it.
Mm.
uh,
Yeah, that makes sense. I would agree with that. I thought it's so many times when you deal with like customer service, you're like, man, you're human. Let's speak human to human, right? Like,
yeah,
there's a
yeah.
mistake that happened. I'm not trying to scam you, but you're basically being a robot. Like, why are you being a robot? Just bro to bro. Like, let's just figure this out, man.
Yeah, there was another article where I read, like I think in Sweden or somewhere, the supermarket is going back to opening in-person checkout counters for people who would like to chat.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And we are here building automatic like cashless stores. So I think there is a certain value in that, authentic connection between human, like logos over characters, logos
Mm.
over people, like sorry,
Wait,
people
wait.
over.
So what do you mean by logos over characters?
I Sorry, characters over logos.
Oh
Got
yeah,
it the
my
other way
bad.
around. But character over logos, where you'd like to see authentic, relatable human emotion over a logo. Uh,
Mm.
and
Mm.
I think that's sort of why like creator economy is capturing this anti-curational trend really well, because they
Mm.
check all the boxes. They're authentic. Most of them are building live iterating their brands.
Mm.
Their content is anti-curational. Most of the stuff happens on a whim. Like probably if you're obviously having a dance TikTok account, you need to practice, but you're kind of doing, hey, like I thought this is cool, and I'll just practice it, try it out, put it in the world, zero
Yeah.
like zero
Dude,
effort.
I want to give an example here, which is a brand called Leaf, which are doing TikTok marketing. They actually make razors. Their razors aren't like the biggest invention in the world. It's only an all metal razor. The content they're making is going viral. Every video they make hits hundreds of thousands of views. And you know what the content is? They actually took like one of those mortal pestle things, one of those containers where they put shaving foam in it, and they started to create foam out of it, and then started like literally did it for the next 30 seconds to a minute while they talked about their brand, what they're building at Leaf, or what
Mm-hmm.
their founder how it came about. So the video content is this like sort of very cringy, but also you can't stop watching. Like how much foam will there be at the end of it?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then they're putting the story to it.
I think
Like
at the
that's
end of the day, that's what anti-curational is. It's like cringe. Yeah, it's
mm,
sort of like our maximalism phase, like our generation's maximalism phase. But we are like, again, they were, like the big hype around like Y2K maximalism coming
mm,
back, but it didn't. Like we created our own weird, tasteful way of like curating maximalism, cringe, anti-curational content, if that makes sense.
yeah, totally. Oh, do you? So we also hinted a little bit on inclusivity and wellness that plays very well with just being authentic and showing your character. Yesterday we talked about just anti-dark pattern being one of the things. Do you want to
Yeah,
talk about that a little bit?
in terms of like apps and things, right? Like apps are being more passive. It's like how hardware has disappeared into the background now. I think apps are trying to do the same.
Mm,
Uh, and that, what does that require is not getting your attention or not having you on the app. I think Be Real is a good example, where it's sort of that anti-dark pattern. You just post once, they're not really like, and
with you
it's,
once a day, once a week, what
yeah,
is it?
like once a day, like every 24 hours, like that's it. And even the way you take a picture is like timed, and you can actually see how many times like you can retake in stuff. So there,
Mm,
it's there, all those are signifiers like encouraging you to be your most authentic self. They're not trying to like hook you on to, and again, how Be Real monetizes its business, like they haven't started monetizing it. It's like a different story, but it's just one app like doing it dark patterns, right? The other day I came across this whole library of apps that are being built on anti-dark patterns, which are like less engagement seeking. And these were not entire apps, but these are just like library of apps where like part of their app they're trying something different.
mm.
And so those are the anti dark patterns I was talking about.
Do you feel like your standard typical consumer realizes this? Like when they see an offering like BU, they're like, yes, this is gonna allow me to spend less time on the phone, more time doing things in real world.
um I think no, because for example, the other day I seen this video where this like content creator was talking about how his kids were telling him not to edit the photos, just
Mm,
keep it casual. Like, dad, don't edit it, don't put filters, we don't
yeah.
like it. And that person is not, that kid was not telling because it was like cool or because he noticed. He just said like, hey, my friends don't like it.
Yeah.
Sort of like this collective, like again, social contract.
Yeah.
And
In their surrounding, basically no one's doing it.
yeah, so they're not actively or consciously acknowledging that. And but when they do find products where they feel comfortable with the same character or aspirations they have, that's when they buy into the product. Because I think it's hard to tell like, hey, is that what makes you buy into an app or a product. Because most of like a lot of apps have like first time subscribers peak and like they retain only few. So we can't really tell if it's the marketing or a product or something like that. But the people who do stay or like make it popular, like how Facebook became popular, because like connecting was like a huge thing.
Mm.
And I think like Be Real, that unauthentic trend is like a huge, like it's literally called Be Real. Like the name itself like speaks to the biggest trend we're talking about. Yeah.
I feel like in authenticity or the whole idea of being edited is kind of going away in general, right? It
Hmm.
feels like LinkedIn would probably be the last place where that happens. But speaking of like how trends trickle down to other fields, let's talk about our field, right? As an exercise for today,
Yeah.
I want to talk about 4 predictions of trends that we think are going to take off this year over the next 2 to 3 years in industrial design?
For sure. Do you want to start?
Cool. Yeah, I can start. It kind of what we were talking about building in open and having more exposure to the behind the scenes of building things. I feel the biggest trend we're going to see is how ID people showcase their process. I feel like we're going to see a lot more of behind the scenes work, whether that's setting up new businesses or whether that's doing client work. There will be more authenticity in showing work. There's of course going to be like beautiful imagery because generally designers have good visuals,
But
but
they're going to be curated.
there's going to be more, let's say, more
Anti.
answers,
Okay.
or you know what I mean, like
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
feels like when you look at design work, when you look at consultancy work, like even McKinsey, you don't know how they really work, right? Like if I were to really explain to you, it is a lot to explain, and when I actually put visuals, it just feels like I'm not even breaking
Yeah.
half of that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I feel there's going to be a lot more authenticity in the way we show our stuff. It's still going to be curated in the terms of like visuals and renderings and whatnot, but there's going to be a lot more information being in the open. I think that goes in parallel with my thought that more and more people will start their own industrial design practices, and they will rely on their community to sort of bring their name up. Uh,
Yeah.
it kind of goes back to how many companies are now have to do social media because that's how they spread the word and spread the message, and excite potential hires and whatnot. So that's one big one for me. I'm gonna let you do point two, and then we'll look at two more.
Yeah, I think the biggest one I'm seeing is now that eco warriors have become, casual climate routinists. A lot of brands are looking for alternative uh, ways of including like like real sustainable materials. There's actually a razor like brand which has like 100% biodegradable materials, like how they build their razors. Not the name's not coming to my head. But there are also like studios, like ID Studios specifically, sort of spearheading this. Like I know there's one called Prowl here in San Francisco. There's Above in Sweden and Maroma in London. I think like Abba is building its own repository of like a R&D repository of like material innovation, and Maroma has done like packaging for Wagamama based on sustainability. And I think like in fact like even Layer to an extent has shown like sustainable packaging in like its recent psychedelic packaging exercise. So because now the trend of sustainability has kind of reached its early majority phase. People are trying to incorporate it more
Mm-hmm.
uh, and like authentically. So you're not really troubling that you're giving what you're showing.
Cool. And I'm excited about that. I think that's a new venue for industrial designers to explore altogether. I hope the life cycle of a product is a big sort of talking point now when we talk about materials and long term sustainability. Point number three, on a very different tangent, kind of related to the business of design, is it's almost a prediction at this point, but I think monthly pricing for designers is going to be a thing, and for design studios. What that means is you subscribe to a design studio,
Hmm.
and every month you get certain hours of work delivered to you. The reason I say that it's going to become a common practice in industrial design is there's three reasons to it. One, because of the recent layoffs and recent uncertainty in economics and finance. A lot of people would be looking to streamline their projections and streamline the expected business over the next months. The best way to do that is to work on these retainer models, and retainers have existed throughout. So that's one where I think people would want more stability in estimating their income.
Mm-hmm.
Second, I think this model is already being practiced by web developers and graphic designers and content artists, or like content creators who would, give you a certain number of
Interesting.
Instagram posts or blogs over the next few weeks or months, whatever. One of the examples for that that sort of model is from somebody on Twitter named Brett from DJ. He he started his own creative agency, and he has this pricing model where there's different tiers. You can pay them a certain amount for your base tier,
Oh,
and so on. And over the last, the reason I think bringing this is important is it wasn't a big deal until he posted his revenue, which was upwards of 1.5 million
oh,
in
damn.
annual recurring revenue for the last year. So like it seems like a very successful model. Of course,
Brett,
you
are
have
you
to be.
hiring ID design?
Hey, Brett from DJ, give us a shout.
Uh,
So I think more and more people are going to be exposed to this sort of plan. I think it trickles from your web designers to graphic designers, and then it goes to industrial design, which is a very slow moving industry. And the last reason for this whole shift, I think you'll have bigger leverage, and in the sense that if you know this is what you're going to charge, you know the kind of talent you can hire, and you know the kind of clients you want to work with. Right?
yeah,
There's going to be less play of power here, where
yeah.
a big client is going to just say that, hey, just we have a big submission, let's just do a push over the next week, so your designers have to work extra hours. None of that, because you let your terms be really clear in the subscription. So yeah,
That's
that's my
interesting. Yeah, like it almost. I think that's like a very well suited model um for is like the visual design side of things. Like I can see, because content is king now, whether it's a Netflix show, whether it's a blockbuster movie, or your Instagram feed. Like you need to have good, authentic, relatable content. But it sort of leads me to like my prediction. It's like a mix of few things we've spoken before. Is like these bunch of people who've resigned in 2021 who are building their own brands. Creator economy is at its peak. People are iterating in open. So there's this whole crop of like boutique brands coming up. And I'm almost curious to see like how like ID can tack like how can industrial design take advantage of that. And I know like and there's a studio called Enlisted in San Francisco doing that, where they're building for creator economy brands, like their branding and things like that. So almost makes me want to think that, which a lot of studios are doing already, but ID would kind of need to not only end at hardware, but probably like start with the brand and intent purpose, and
Yeah.
then let that inform your product packaging. So I think if you're an industrial designer right now, learn how like what makes a brand tick, learn about human behavior and brands, and or listen to this episode about the biggest trend. And but I think you need to extend your offering beyond like, hey, here's a hardware product, but build a story around it.
How
If
it
it
how yeah
yeah,
how it
if
relates
it
to
were
people, and
exactly,
yeah.
like if it were in a brand, how would it be? If it should be in a brand that already has a product line, how would it fit in,
Hmm.
while still maintaining authenticity? So I think that's what I'm seeing for industrial designers or studios, is going beyond product, thinking about the story and brand and
Yeah,
visuals.
I do you think you'd be bold enough to say that brand would almost be a given if you were to start an industrial design studio tomorrow?
Yeah, I think it's a given that like ID designers need to like think about brand, because US, it's sort of in its prime state where it's sort of this aspirational economy. So people are looking for like higher meaning and better engagement through brands, which is more human and emotional. Like again, character over logos. So they're looking for a good relatable messaging.
Differentiating yourself would be key, because technology is only now facing almost like peak. This is my intuition, very bro sciencey, but it doesn't feel like we have made that many technical advancements in the last
Yeah,
couple of years.
there was a news article where I read we're sort of like hitting a bottleneck on like how many transistor chips we can put on
Hmm.
like a chip. So that is kind of true. I think like yeah, where tech in terms of design is saturated, your brand and storytelling is what's going to make the difference.
Yeah.
And ID people can use these brand guidelines to like translate it into product features or like interaction. Like the many ways you can interpret it. Like if your brand is all about relatability or something like that,
Yeah.
they could look into like CMF. But again, you need to like understand how to make an engaging brand to like
Yeah.
even build those brand principles. So that's why I think it's like really important for ID people to learn about brand in this economy.
Agreed 100%. So these are the trends that we think are going to be really important for industrial design from here on out. We're going to talk about four trends or ideas that we absolutely hate, things that we wish did not exist or did not become a trend.
Yeah. I'll say one. It's the most nerdy, or like so I'll get that out of the way, which is like voice user interface. And the research has just figured out that it's like very intensive to use voice to interact. So you actually need to try to, because they thought like everyone's just gonna be walking around the house like talking to Siri, whether it's the kitchen, bathroom, bedroom. But it's actually it's a huge cognitive load for a person. But that's the nerdy trend. That let's push that out. What are you hating, or like what are you
Uh,
seeing fading out?
Similarly, NFTs, man, the one thing that's taken the world by a storm over the last 2 years. Just I cannot wrap my head around the technical benefit of having a JPEG to your name versus an actual physical art piece. Uh, and looking at how crypto is pretty much tanked over the last 6 months, and knowing that we're hitting recession, I do not know in what world an NFT asset is exciting.
This this is my I don't know if I was born in a generation which was not exposed early on to VR, but I hate VR. And there were two things that happened. The metaverse didn't take off. It's still very meta. People don't know what it is. But surprisingly, there was rise of mixed reality content while VR was not taking off. So that was like really interesting. The reason I said I'm old school is that like really not a big fan of like a headset covering my experience. I think XR is the way to go, but VR didn't take off. What are your thoughts?
I have to agree. I would say that I was anti VR from the start, and there was a point where I thought, you know what, maybe it's okay. Maybe I can look dumb for a bit to actually be immersed. Because to me, it was more about like, shit, man, I'm really gonna look dumb if I wear this box on my head, and then I'm trying to balance myself over like some
Yeah,
hypothetical
yeah.
rope. Like I found the act of doing it very cringy, but I feel like when I tried it a few times, I get dizzy, but that's like a personal problem. Second, I do feel like the resolution, the technology, the actual content itself doesn't live up to the true potential
I
of it.
agree.
That's where
Yeah.
you mentioned XR, which is very interesting, because that's where I think bridging your real world with a layer of
Yeah,
information.
I think that's more interesting. And both of us have tried, like, I've tried the Oculus Quest and you've tried the Pro. And even Pro was, I think, is a step in the right direction, which is like mixed reality.
Yeah, and it's
And
completely wireless, so you can literally walk out
yeah,
and have things projected in your
exactly.
garage or whatever.
So if you are building VR headsets out there, I would say don't, unless there's a real genuine reason for it. But
Have you seen the new HTC Vive headset?
yeah, it was pretty interesting. I was
Yeah.
watching the designer actually dropped into Marcus Brownlee's studio, and he was
Hmm.
explaining like why they removed the top strap here is because a lot of women were not finding like it just doesn't sit well in a lot of like women's head because of the hair, or
Hmm.
especially like people with an afro or something like
Or
that.
with a ponytail as well.
Yeah, like that's why they went for the sunglass design. It was a really interesting conversation. I'm excited to see if it's
Yeah,
better
and
than the Quest Pro.
it looks way better than what I would expect from HTC.
Yeah, and apparently it's like pretty light, way
Yeah,
lighter
it's
than
good
Quest Pro.
reviews around CES all around. Like people were excited about the new
Yeah.
headset. Um, we have one more left, and I think that's in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, this one again a trend I'm really that didn't take off and not a big fan of is skeuomorphism.
What is
People were
skeuomorphism?
going batshit. It's basically when your UI buttons like signifiers and affordances mimic signifiers and affordance. Like a good example is like say if you represent a light with a switch, like in the
Yeah.
real world, you're trying if there is a switch interaction you need in your app, whether it's for an actual switch or for something else for turning a page, you literally like try to like mimic that, but it's also like a
Hmm.
very 3D like embossed look.
Oh, right.
So it might not need to mimic the real
Yeah.
signifier and affordance, but it's sort of like this embossed look of like very touchy feely buttons, and it's not great.
Did you
So,
ever have those apps where I had a iPod Touch, and I would have this lighter app where you
oh,
press the button, and then the motion would enable the flame to move around, and also I had
yeah.
this water dripping, or like a beer opening
Yeah.
app, like where you just open the bottle and then you like
This is the whole during the Tom the Cat era. That's all apps were. Honestly, they were more plain and simple. You
yeah,
play around with them for 15 minutes, you get bored. But now
that was
I'm
it.
24/7 on my reels. Someone needs to drag me out of my room. So, yeah. I think that sort of like ends the trends that we hate. The biggest shift that we have seen in this year, like or building up towards this year, that is the anti-trend. And the most important part of the podcast, what do we name it?
What do we name this podcast? Man, I love this exercise. This is the most interesting part of the podcast. The trend that never was supposed to be, or something like that.
Yeah, I think this is a very Harvard Business Review title. The biggest trend is anti-trend, or like a fast
No, I
talk.
think we shouldn't reveal what the biggest trend is, because then that's the
Yeah, probably like the biggest trend brands. Though. The biggest